Why did she always sit in the corner, unnoticed, as if her presence was almost an afterthought? The armory was alive with noise, bolts clattering into trays, steel doors slamming shut, voices bouncing off the concrete walls. Yet she was apart from it all, not invisible, just deliberately unseen. Staff Sergeant Raina Mercer had perfected that art, the art of silence, the art of belonging everywhere and nowhere at once. And maybe that's why Colonel Briggs noticed her. He'd been doing the most ordinary thing that morning: paperwork, scratching a pen against inventory sheets, tallying rifles and carbines, logging serial numbers that all blurred together into the tedious rhythm of military order. He hated the monotony, but he trusted it. Discipline lived in the smallest details. A missing magazine could be the difference between victory and a body bag. But then a sound cut through, not the clang of a door or the shuffle of boots. No, this was delicate, almost reverent, the soft clink of metal handled with care. Briggs froze. He had lived too long in places where the smallest sound meant survival. His ears could tell the difference between chaos and intent, and what he heard now was deliberate, controlled, not normal. His eyes scanned the cavernous armory until they caught her Mercer, seated at a side bench, turned away from everyone else. Her shoulders curved in quiet focus, hair falling forward as she leaned over a weapon too long, too heavy to be anything ordinary. The way her hands moved, the way she polished steel with a cloth. It was not routine maintenance. It was ritual. Briggs felt it before he saw it, the prickle at the back of the neck, that instinct screaming, something is wrong. The object in her hands was unmistakable, a sniper's rifle, long, lean, battle-worn, but it wasn't on any manifest. Its scope was custom, its barrel non-standard, its stock scarred and tired. This weapon had lived a life beyond regulation. He didn't think. Reflex guided him. His hand went to his holster, Beretta snapping free, safety off with a clean, metallic click. "Staff Sergeant Mercer," he said. His voice was low, steady. "Set the weapon down, slowly." The sound of his words sliced the armory in half. Every soldier froze. Even the air seemed to hold still. But she didn't move. Her hands continued, cloth brushing along the length of the barrel, gentle, practiced, almost tender, as though he hadn't spoken, as though a colonel wasn't standing behind her with a pistol leveled at her back. Defiance or indifference. He stepped closer, heavy boots grinding against concrete. The rifle came into sharper view, and then he saw them. Tiny etchings, carved into the steel near the receiver. Not scratches, not decoration, tally marks. One after another, neat but uneven, a line of lives measured and recorded in silence. 100 of them. And just beside the last, a small emblem etched deep, a feathered wing wrapped around a zero. Briggs' throat went dry. He knew that mark. He had read it before, buried in classified after-action reports that hardly anyone had clearance to see. Files so redacted they looked like riddles more than history. But one thing had always been consistent: the call sign. Valkyrie 0. The ghost sniper. The one who appeared in shadows of operations no one ever admitted happened. The one whispered about in dark corners of briefing tents, never allowed in official halls. A myth, they said. A story soldiers told each other to feel safer in hostile mountains. But the rifle was here, and so was she. And suddenly, the quiet weapons tech polishing steel in a forgotten corner wasn't what she seemed at all. "Where did you get that rifle?" His voice was sharper now, clipped, demanding. Finally she looked up. Her eyes were calm, too calm, a mask of distance and disinterest. No fear, no surprise, just the cold stare of someone who had learned long ago that words rarely changed outcomes. Then just as quickly she turned back to the rifle and ignored him. It was more powerful than any answer she could have given. The other soldiers in the armory held their breath. A colonel with a weapon drawn, defied by a staff sergeant who hadn't even spoken. The balance of authority shifted in silence. Frustration flickered inside Briggs, but it was dulled by something else. Something he hadn't expected: respect, or maybe fear. He called another NCO over. "Check the serial number." The young man hesitated but obeyed, eyes darting between Briggs's pistol and Mercer's unshaken frame. He bent over the rifle, squinting at the numbers, typing them into the database. The pause stretched long. "Colonel, sir," the soldier's voice trembled with confusion. "No match. This weapon doesn't exist." The words dropped heavy in the room. Of course it didn't. Briggs stepped closer, his pistol lowered but his eyes locked on the chain of tally marks. 100 decisions, 100 quiet verdicts. This wasn't just a weapon. It was history, blood-bound and undeniable. "Valkyrie 0, he whispered, almost to himself. Her hands stilled, just for a breath, and in that breath he saw it, the flicker of recognition, of memory she had tried to bury. Briggs pulled something from his pocket, a worn, laminated photo, surveillance, grainy. A lone figure crouched on a ridge in Afghanistan, rifle angled, face obscured by distance and shadow. The caption in his mind was burned forever: unidentified sniper asset. Call sign, Valkyrie 0. He placed it on the bench beside her. "I was there," he said quietly, 8 years ago. A SEAL team pinned down, trapped. We thought they were lost. Then shots, perfect shots. One by one the enemy fell. No one knew who it was. The official report said luck, but I knew better. That was you." She looked at the photo. For the first time, emotion cracked through. Not much, just the faintest shadow in her eyes. Then it was gone. "That mission doesn't exist," she said. Her voice was flat, final. Briggs leaned closer. "It does, and so do you. You're her, Valkyrie 0. Why are you here, Mercer? Hiding behind paperwork, cleaning rifles while ghosts of your past do the talking." Before she could answer, the alarm hit. Shrill, piercing, the kind that freezes blood. Not a drill. Every soldier in the building stiffened. Lights flashed red, speakers blaring with distorted urgency. The voice of command cracked through static. "All available units, this is control. Recon Team 37 ambushed in Sentinel Peaks, pinned down under heavy fire. Immediate support required. Repeat, Recon 37 under fire. Casualty risk high." Sentinel Peaks. The name alone carried weight. Rugged cliffs, jagged ridges where the earth itself became an enemy. Every commander dreaded it. A place where men were swallowed whole, not by bullets but by mountains. Briggs looked at Mercer. Her mask was gone. In its place, focus. Her eyes sharpened, her breath slowed. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. She wasn't the quiet armorer now. She was something else. Briggs felt it in his gut. She wasn't listening to him anymore. She was already listening to the battle, hearing the gunfire echoing through broken transmissions, mapping angles and ranges in her mind. For a moment, he almost lowered his weapon fully, just to steady himself. Because for the first time since he'd drawn it, he realized the truth. This woman, this ghost, might be the only one who could save those men in the mountains. The rules, the orders, the layers of command, they all fell away. What mattered now was survival. What mattered was the rifle in her hands, the one etched with 100 marks that told 100 stories. He swallowed hard, words heavy as stone. "They won't make it without you." She didn't answer, she didn't have to. And he knew the legend was about to wake again. How many times had she told herself she was done, that the war had ended for her, even if it never ended out there? Yet now the alarm screamed, rattling the very walls, and she felt something she hadn't let herself feel in years: purpose. Briggs's voice barely cut through the chaos. "Recon team is pinned, high grounds compromised. Air support can't get clean lines," he broke off, pressing his earpiece tighter as static crackled. Shouted fragments reached them. The sound of gunfire in the background, panicked voices short of breath cutting in and out. Multiple hostiles, they've got us locked, can't. Every instinct in Raina's body responded. Her fingers tightened on the rifle stock as if it belonged there, as if it had never left. She had buried it in shadow, hidden it under dust and oil and paperwork. And yet, the moment it returned to her hands, it was like the years in between never existed. Briggs stood in front of her, conflicted. He was a man who believed in order and rules, but his face betrayed something else now, desperation. "If you are who I think you are," he said, voice rough, "then I'm asking you, not as a colonel, as a soldier, as someone who knows what it's like to be out there with no chance in hell. I'm asking you to prove it, not to me, to them." He pushed the rifle into her hands. She didn't argue, she didn't promise, she didn't say a word. She simply accepted it. And the armory, that cold cathedral of steel and order, suddenly felt smaller, like it couldn't contain what she had just become. Raina's movements flowed without thought. Chamber checked. Bolt drawn back and forward with a satisfying snap. Scope adjusted by instinct, tiny clicks aligning it to her muscle memory. She ran her hand along the barrel, feeling the tally marks beneath her fingers. Each one a ghost, each one whispering back into her mind. Her body remembered what her soul had tried to forget. Then, without ceremony, she turned and walked out. No glance back, no explanation, just a figure dissolving into sunlight, rifle slung, hair dark against the gray concrete. The ghost was in motion. The sentinel peaks loomed on the horizon, jagged silhouettes cutting into the Colorado sky. From a distance, they looked almost beautiful. Sharp ridges painted gold by the noon sun, clouds spilling shadows across their faces. But every soldier stationed near Fort Carson knew the truth. Those ridges weren't just rock and soil. They were teeth. And once they closed around you, they didn't let go. As Raina moved across the outer perimeter, a small team of spotters fell in behind her. Briggs must have sent them, though none dared to speak. They followed at a distance, weapons in hand, confusion in their eyes. Who was she? A quiet technician 1 hour, a silent storm the next. She didn't look at them, she didn't slow down. Her boots struck dirt with deliberate rhythm. Her eyes swept the ridgelines, calculating. She could already hear the firefight ahead, faint cracks of rifles, the heavier thump of machine guns, echoes rolling down through stone valleys. Her ears separated the sounds like instruments in a symphony. She knew where the fire was coming from. She knew how high the enemy was positioned. She knew how little time the trapped team had. At the base of a steep incline, she stopped. "This is where you wait," she said. Her voice was calm, almost detached. The spotters shifted uncomfortably. One opened his mouth to argue, but her tone cut through any hesitation. Not loud, not commanding, just final. They stayed behind. She began to climb. The slope was a mess of shale and loose rock, every step threatening to betray her. She moved like she'd been born to it. Each boot placement tested, balanced, trusted only after she felt it hold. Her breathing stayed steady, measured against the thinning air. As she climbed higher, the battlefield revealed itself. Below, the Recon team huddled in fragments of cover, a shallow outcropping, a cluster of boulders. They were trapped in the worst possible place, exposed from above, unable to move, pinned like insects under glass. And above them, nearly a kilometer away, the enemy owned the mountain. Figures in mismatched camouflage crouched behind stone, rifles flashing as they poured fire down into the valley. They weren't just fighting the team, they were suffocating them. Through the shimmer of heat, Raina caught it, a glint, a reflection from glass. The sniper. She lowered herself into a crouch, movement silent, body molding into the slope. The rifle came off her shoulder, bipod planted into grit, stock against her shoulder, scope caps open. The world narrowed. Distance, 1,048 meters. Wind, negligible. Elevation, 3 clicks up. Her pulse slowed until it matched her breath. Inhale, hold, exhale. And then the crack. The recoil pressed against her shoulder, sharp but familiar. Through the scope she watched the enemy sniper's head snap back, body folding into the rock. One. Already gunfire shifted. Enemy fighters faltered, confused. For a heartbeat the Recon team lifted their heads. Hope flickered. Raina shifted. Another target broke cover. The crosshairs found his chest. The shot was smooth, clean. Two. But the mountain never gave anything freely. A flicker in her periphery, another glint. Her instinct screamed before her mind caught up. She dropped her head, a split second before a supersonic crack sliced the air above her skull. The bullet passed so close it kissed strands of her hair, a burning whisper of death. She rolled, swung the scope, found the second marksman wedged into a narrow cut of stone. For the briefest instant, their eyes met through glass. Her finger tightened. Three. The rifle's report echoed like judgment across the peaks. Down below, the Recon team moved, desperate, stumbling, dragging their wounded. Her shots had broken the cage, if only slightly. But the enemy wasn't done. Rounds hammered into her position, stone shattering into splinters around her. Dust stung her cheek, blood beading where a shard cut skin. She didn't flinch. Another machine gun opened up from a hidden angle. Tracers carved the air, forcing the team flat again. She scanned, calculating. To hit it, she'd have to move, abandon her perfect perch. It wasn't even a decision. The bipod folded in a fluid motion, rifle slung. She crawled, slid, climbed laterally across the slope, each movement balanced on the knife edge of gravity. Rock shifted under her, threatening to betray her, but she never stopped. Halfway to her new position, another shot. Close, too close. It hissed past her ear, the sound so sharp it left her ears ringing. She dropped, pressed flat against stone, heart hammering. For a moment she let herself feel it, the fear, the brush with death. Then she let it go. Slowly she eased the rifle forward, barrel peeking over rock. Scope aligned. There the machine gun nest. Two men dug in, one firing, the other feeding belt. Her breath steadied. The first round found the gunner's neck. The second dropped the spotter. Silence followed, almost shocking. Below, the Recon team surged forward, seizing the window she had carved open for them. Briggs's voice crackled faintly in her earpiece. "Keep them moving, Mercer. You're their lifeline." She didn't answer, she never did. Her reply was the next shot. And the next. And the next. Enemy resistance faltered. Each time they tried to regroup, she was already there, waiting, crosshair steady, verdict delivered in lead and steel. But she wasn't thinking about numbers. She wasn't thinking about victory. She was thinking about the lives below her, crawling, bleeding, desperate to live. Every shot was a choice. Every shot was a weight. And maybe that was the part that hurt the most. Because for every tally she carved into her rifle, there was an unmarked one too, the soldier who walked away because she pulled the trigger. The lives she never met, never touched, but saved all the same. And as the Recon team neared the saddle that would take them out of the kill zone, she knew. This was why she had tried to disappear. Not because she had failed, but because she hadn't. Because she remembered all of them. The ones she ended. And the ones she carried. And some burdens never let go. What did it feel like to be seen again, truly seen, after years of hiding in plain sight? She didn't have the answer yet. Not while her rifle was still warm, not while echoes of gunfire still clung to the ridges of Sentinel Peaks. All she knew was that she had stepped back into a world she had sworn to leave behind, and the ghosts she carried, they had been waiting for her. From her perch high on the slope, Raina watched the last of the enemy scatter, desperate figures breaking contact, melting into shadowed folds of mountain terrain. Her scope followed them until they vanished completely. She didn't fire. She had no need. The field was broken. The tide had turned. Slowly she lowered her rifle. The silence that followed was heavier than the fight. Down below, the recon team moved with frantic energy, dragging their wounded, shouting into radios, voices edged with relief they were afraid to admit. To them, survival felt like luck. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know the quiet figure on the slope above had rewritten their fate one round at a time. And they never would. Raina stayed low, scanning the ridges one last time. Her body was wired, senses heightened, but the fight was over. She slid the scope caps shut, folded the bipod, and slung the rifle back across her shoulder. The ritual was as precise as her shots, almost tender, almost reluctant. The climb down was slower. She knew mountains well enough to understand. The descent was always more dangerous than the ascent. Loose rock threatened to betray her every step. Her muscles trembled with the aftershock of focus, the burn of oxygen-starved lungs. Yet her face betrayed nothing. When she reached the base, the spotters were waiting. They didn't speak. Their eyes followed her, a mix of awe and disbelief. Just hours ago she had been a quiet weapons tech, a background figure no one paid attention to. Now she had revealed herself as something entirely different, something they didn't even have words for. She walked past them without acknowledgement, boots crunching against gravel, rifle heavy against her back. Back at the perimeter, chaos reigned. Medics rushed to stabilize the wounded. Officers barked orders. The rescued recon team stumbled into safety, dirt and blood masking the relief etched into their faces. And in the middle of it all stood Colonel Briggs. He didn't move at first. He just watched her cross the open ground, step by step, like a ghost returning from a place few survived. She looked the same as when she'd left, no swagger, no pride, no visible mark of what she had done. Only a faint line of dust streaked across her cheek where stone had cut her skin. When she stopped in front of him, silence stretched. Around them, the world roared with noise, but in that moment between them, there was only stillness. "You saved them," he said finally. His voice was low, not a question. Her gaze flicked briefly toward the recon team. She gave the smallest nod, barely there. Briggs's eyes dropped to her rifle and froze. Near the cluster of tally marks, a fresh one had been carved. Shallow, hurried, but unmistakable. "You marked it already." His words were quiet, almost disbelieving. She met his stare, unflinching. "Some things are worth remembering." It wasn't pride, it wasn't arrogance, it was fact. Briggs felt something shift in him then. For years he had believed discipline was built on control, on hierarchy, on strict order. But standing before her, before Valkyrie Zero, he saw something else. Discipline could also live in silence, in choice, in the weight of a trigger pulled not for glory, but for the lives of others. He didn't salute, he didn't order. He just nodded once, an unspoken acknowledgement. That evening, the sun fell behind the peaks, casting long shadows across the base. The mountains turned black against a sky freckled with stars, and the echoes of the fight still seemed to linger in the air. In his office, Briggs reviewed after-action feeds. Drone footage, thermal scans, broken transmissions. Each confirmed what his eyes had already seen. Her precision was absolute. Each time her rifle spoke, an enemy fell. No wasted rounds, no hesitation. The recon team's leader stopped by, his face pale and tired but alive. He shook Briggs's hand with rough gratitude. "Whoever that was out there," he said, shaking his head, "they weren't human. It was like they could see the future, like they knew what we'd need before we even moved." Briggs didn't correct him. He didn't reveal the truth. He simply nodded, accepting the thanks on her behalf. Because some ghosts were meant to stay hidden. Before dawn the next morning, Briggs found her again. The training grounds were still half-shadowed, dew clinging to the dirt. And there she was, already at work, setting up target stands, adjusting markers, preparing the field. The rifle leaned against a barricade, not like a trophy, but like a tool she would soon pass to others. "You're starting early," Briggs said. Raina didn't look up. "There's no other way." He watched her for a moment. You agreed then to train them. She secured a target with the same precision she gave to every task. They'll need more than aim, more than skill. They need to understand the weight of it. Every shot carries someone's life. Briggs nodded slowly. He wasn't sure if she was speaking to him or to herself. As the first young soldiers began to arrive, curious and hesitant, Raina stood in silence, waiting. She didn't wear the aura of legend. She didn't announce herself as Valkyrie Zero. She was just Staff Sergeant Mercer, the armorer, the instructor. But Briggs knew the truth. And perhaps the truth was better this way. Not carved into stone, not written in reports, but alive, breathing, passing quietly into the hands of the next generation. Later, when the field emptied and the recruits were gone, Briggs lingered. He watched her clean the rifle again, cloth sliding across the scarred barrel, tally marks catching the light. "Does it ever stop?" he asked finally. Her hands stilled. She didn't look up. "No." The word was simple, but the way she said it, flat, certain, carried all the weight of memory. The faces she had seen, the ones she hadn't, the tally marks etched not just into steel but into her. Briggs exhaled, long and heavy. He thought of the men who had been saved on that mountain. He thought of the silence she carried with her. And he wondered what kind of burden a person had to bear to become the ghost that saved others without ever saving herself. In the fading light, she set the rifle down, stood, and walked away. Her boots left faint prints in the dirt, already softening in the wind. And Briggs knew some stories never made it to the surface. They lived in shadows, in silence, in the spaces between headlines. But sometimes, silence was louder than any war cry. Word count. Would you like me to move into part 4, where we dig deeper into Raina's past, Afghanistan, the mission that made her Valkyrie Zero, and start threading in her internal conflicts more heavily? Here's part 4, continuing seamlessly, expanding the emotional core with flashbacks into Raina's past and her inner conflict. This runs 1,500 plus words. Why did she keep count? Why carve lines into steel when every soldier was taught to forget, to move on, to bury the past in silence? Raina knew why, but admitting it even to herself was harder than pulling any trigger. Each tally wasn't just a mark of death. It was proof of choice. A reminder that she had decided, that she had judged, that she had carried the weight of ending a life so another could keep theirs. Forgetting would have been easier, but forgetting meant lying, and lies didn't keep you alive. She ran her fingers along the rifle again that night, long after the base had gone quiet. Alone in the armory, shadows stretching across racks of weapons, she let herself remember. Not all of it, just one. Just enough to remind her why she had left and why she had come back. Why do memories come back most vividly in the quiet? The armory was silent, lights dimmed, rows of weapons asleep in their steel cradles. Outside, Fort Carson had gone still. Only the distant hum of generators broke the night. And yet in that silence, Raina's past returned louder than any alarm. She sat at her workbench, the rifle across her knees. Her fingers brushed along the tally marks one by one, each cut shallow, uneven, carved in haste after the smoke cleared. 100 lives, but not just theirs. Hers, too, pieces taken away each time she pulled the trigger. And it began with one night in Afghanistan. Kunar province, 8 years ago. The valley had been burning with tracer fire. A SEAL team pinned down on jagged rock, ambushed by fighters who knew the terrain too well. Raina had been there, though not officially. She wasn't supposed to exist. Her position was high on a ridge, wind snapping against her face, dust coating her lips. She had crawled into place hours earlier, stomach scraping stone, heartbeat steady as a metronome. The call had come in desperate. The SEALs had no way out, air support blind to the enemy sniper cutting them apart. That sniper was good, too good. He had killed 3 men already. Each time one of them moved for cover, his round found them with cruel precision. She lay flat, her rifle planted into the dirt, scope trained down the valley. She saw him, a faint silhouette tucked into shadow, his muzzle flashing fire. She didn't need more than a glimpse. She measured distance, wind, angle. Her breathing slowed, and then the world narrowed to a heartbeat and a crosshair. Her shot broke the night. The enemy sniper collapsed into his own shadow. The SEALs didn't know where it had come from. They only knew they could move again. She didn't stop. She tracked others through her scope, cutting them down one by one as they tried to adjust. Her hands were cold. Her heart was steady. Each round found its place. By the time the SEALs pulled back to safety, the ridge below her was littered with bodies. She didn't stay to be thanked. She never spoke to them. She ghosted back into shadow before dawn. Later the report would call it luck, a miracle. But Briggs had been there. Even then he'd known it wasn't luck, it was her. The memory clawed at her now, years later. She set the rifle on the bench and closed her eyes, pressing her palms against them. She could still see it, clear as the day it happened. The way the bodies dropped, the way silence fell when her rifle went quiet. And beneath it all, the weight. Not just of the ones she killed, but of the ones she saved. That was what stayed with her longest. The faces of soldiers she never spoke to, never met, but who walked away because she was somewhere above them, unseen, unheard. They would never know. They would never remember her name. And maybe that was the point. At dawn, the world pulled her back. She stood on the training grounds, watching young soldiers gather. They were fresh-faced, wide-eyed, rifles too new in their hands. They looked at her with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. Some had heard whispers about sentinel peaks. Most didn't believe them. To them, she was just the quiet armorer suddenly thrust into a role she hadn't asked for. She said nothing at first. She let silence do the work. Then she spoke, voice low, measured, each word carrying weight. A rifle isn't just steel. It isn't just a tool, it's a decision. Every time you pull that trigger, someone doesn't go home, or someone does. You don't shoot for glory. You don't shoot for numbers. You shoot for the one person counting on you. And if you can't carry that weight, then put the rifle down now. Her eyes scanned them. No one moved. Good, she said softly. Then we start. Briggs watched from a distance. He saw the way they listened to her. The way her silence held more authority than any shouted order. She didn't posture. She didn't boast. She taught through precision, through example, through the quiet certainty of someone who had been there, who had done it, and who had paid for every choice. And Briggs thought of the night before, of the faint new tally mark etched into her rifle. She hadn't hesitated to add it. She hadn't buried it in denial. She had remembered. It struck him then, that was her burden. She remembered so no one else had to. Later that week, Briggs called her into his office. The room was cramped, paper stacked, lit only by a desk lamp. She stood at attention, but her face was unreadable. "Why did you stop?" he asked quietly. Her brow furrowed. "You were Valkyrie 0. You saved men who never knew your name, and then you disappeared into an armory. Why?" She held his stare. The silence stretched long enough that he almost thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, she spoke. "Because I couldn't carry it anymore. Because when you become good at killing, they stop asking if you should. They just keep sending you. And one day you realize the only way to survive is to stop being who you are." Her voice didn't break, but Briggs heard what it cost her to say it. "Does it haunt you?" he asked. "All of it," she said simply. That night, alone again, Raina picked up the rifle. Her thumb traced the etching of the wing and the 0, the mark that had once been her signature. She wondered if the world would ever understand. That legends weren't born from heroics. They were carved from silence, from choices no one wanted to make, from burdens no one wanted to carry. And sometimes, the ones who carried them longest were the ones forgotten first. She leaned the rifle back into its cradle, dim light catching on the 100 marks carved deep into steel. And for the first time in years, she whispered aloud to the empty room. I remember. Why did silence feel safer than praise? The young recruits looked at her differently now. Word had spread faster than any official report. The story of Sentinel Peaks had leaked through whispers in Chow lines, through fragments overheard on radios, through the looks in the eyes of the men who'd been saved. They didn't know details. They didn't know the truth, but they knew someone had done the impossible. And their eyes found her. Raina Mercer, the quiet armorer who had kept her head down for years, who had lived in corners and shadows, now carried the weight of their stares. She hated it. On the training ground, she ignored their glances. She spoke only when necessary. Adjust your stance. Breathe through your belly. Exhale, don't hold. Your pulse will betray you if you let it. They listened with rapt attention. One recruit, barely 20, asked the question others were too afraid to voice. "Sergeant, were you the one, out there in the peaks?" Her eyes locked on him, calm, cold, no. The answer was absolute, final. The boy nodded quickly, looking down at his boots. The others didn't push further, but she knew they didn't believe her. And that was the problem. That evening, Briggs caught up with her in the armory. She was, as always, cleaning the rifle, cloth sliding along steel, hands moving with practiced precision. He leaned against the doorway, watching her for a moment before speaking. "You can't keep this ghost alive forever," he said. Her hands didn't stop. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You do." He stepped closer, voice lowering. "They know. Maybe not the details, maybe not the call sign, but they know you're different. You saved that team, Mercer. You can't pretend you didn't." She set the rifle down and met his gaze. "I didn't do it for them to know." Briggs exhaled. "Then why?" Her jaw tightened. "Because someone had to. Because I couldn't listen to men die when I knew I could stop it. That's all." "Doesn't that make you what they think you are?" Her silence was answer enough. 2 nights later, she woke drenched in sweat. The dreams had returned, jagged, fragmented memories of faces she never knew, bodies falling through her scope, the silence afterward heavier than the gunfire. In one dream, she was back in Cunnar, the seal pinned down, the shot she took, the life she ended. She woke gasping, heart pounding, whispering the same words she always did after those dreams. "Enough." But the ghosts never listened. The next mission request came 3 weeks later. Another patrol missing in hostile terrain. No air support. No backup fast enough. Command debated, argued, hesitated. But Briggs didn't. He found her in the armory, already bent over her rifle as though she had been waiting for the call. He didn't give her an order, he didn't have to. He just asked quietly, "Will you go?" She didn't look at him, she simply nodded once. This time she wasn't alone. The spotters followed again, but now they carried something different in their eyes: trust. They had seen her work once, and though none of them dared speak the word Valkyrie, they carried it with them like a shield. They moved into the mountains at dusk. The air was thin, the light sharp and fatting, every rock casting long shadows. Through her scope, she saw the trapped patrol, 5 men pinned in a dry ravine, gunfire raking down from the cliffs above. The enemy had them surrounded. They wouldn't last another hour. She crawled into position, belly scraping stone, fingers raw from gripping jagged rock. She felt the familiar stillness settle into her bones, the silence before the storm. And then the rifle spoke. One shot and the high ground faltered. Another, and the machine gun fire stuttered to silence. The trapped men scrambled for cover, confusion and hope colliding in their movements. Her spotters whispered updates into radios, voices tight with awe. "Targets down, she's clearing them, keep moving." Raina never responded. Her breath and her trigger were her language, the rest was noise. She shifted position, finding another angle, cutting down threats as they appeared. Her body ached, sweat stung her eyes, but her rhythm never faltered. When the patrol finally broke free of the ravine, stumbling into safer ground, one of them looked up toward her ridge. He couldn't see her. Not really. Just a faint silhouette against stone. But in that moment, she knew he understood. Someone unseen had carried them through. And that was enough. Back at the base, the whispers grew louder. Soldiers spoke of the ghost in the mountains. Some said she was a myth. Others swore they had seen her. The recruits looked at her with wide eyes. Even seasoned officers gave her nods of respect she didn't want. And Raina felt the walls closing in. The more they believed, the harder it became to stay hidden. The harder it became to deny who she had been. That night Briggs found her again. She was outside this time, sitting on a crate, the rifle across her lap. The stars burned sharp above them, the mountains dark silhouettes on the horizon. He sat beside her, silent at first. Then, "You can't outrun this forever." Her eyes stayed on the horizon. "I don't want it." "You don't have a choice." She turned to him, her voice low but edged with steel. "There's always a choice. I made mine when I walked away. Don't drag me back." Briggs studied her face. In the faint starlight, he saw not just defiance but exhaustion. A woman who had carried more than most men would survive. He nodded slowly. "Then why are you still here?" Her silence stretched long. Finally, she looked down at the rifle, fingers tracing the tally marks again. "Because they still need someone," she said quietly, "even if they never know who." Briggs didn't argue, he didn't press. He just sat with her in the silence. And in that silence, the truth was clear. She hadn't come back for herself. She had come back for them. How long can a ghost stay hidden once the living begin to speak her name? By now, whispers had become something more. Not official recognition, not yet, but a story carried from tent to tent, barrack to barrack. A figure on the ridges. A rifle that never missed. A woman who walked back into camp with the same calm she had left with, while the men she saved clutched their lives like borrowed time. To the command structure, it was a problem. To the soldiers, it was a miracle. And to Raina Mercer, it was the one thing she feared most: attention. The summons came quietly without warning. A knock on the armory door, a short order clipped and precise. "Report to operations. Now." Raina walked the corridor in silence, boots echoing on tile. Inside the ops center, screens glowed with maps and drone feeds. Voices murmured around tables littered with documents. At the far end, a general she didn't know sat stiff-backed, hands folded, eyes narrowing as she entered. Colonel Briggs was there too, standing off to the side, jaw tight. "Staff Sergeant Mercer," the general began, voice sharp as glass. "You've been active in at least 2 operations not assigned to your duties, operations that produced unusual outcomes. Care to explain?" Her face remained blank. "No, sir." The general's brow arched. "That's not how this works, Sergeant." Briggs shifted, stepping forward. "With respect, sir, those men would be dead without her." The general's eyes cut toward him. "And what happens when word of this reaches higher channels? What happens when they start asking why a staff sergeant, an armorer, no less, is operating as an off-the-book sniper with hardware that doesn't exist? Do you plan to write that in your report, Colonel?" The room went quiet. Raina stood still, arms at her sides, gaze steady. She had endured interrogations before, debriefs filled with questions meant to trap her. This was no different. "I did what needed to be done," she said finally. The general leaned forward, voice low. "And who gave you the authority to decide that?" Her silence was her answer. Afterward, Briggs caught her outside. The night air was cool, sharp against the heat still simmering in her veins. He walked beside her in silence for a few steps before speaking. "They're scared of you," he said quietly. "I don't want them to notice me at all. Doesn't matter what you want anymore. They've seen you. They can't unsee it." She stopped, turning to him, eyes dark and tired. "Then what happens next? Do they bury me again? Ship me somewhere remote and hope I disappear?" Briggs shook his head. They don't bury assets, they use them. The words hit harder than she expected, because he wasn't wrong. That night the dreams returned. She saw faces. Not enemies, not comrades, just fragments. A boy clutching a rifle too big for him. A woman crying in the dust after her village had been caught in crossfire. A man in camouflage who looked up through her scope just before the trigger broke. Her hand twitched in sleep, fingers curling like they still held the stock. She woke with a start, chest tight, breath ragged. For a long moment she sat in the dark, staring at the rifle resting against the wall. Its silhouette was as familiar to her as her own reflection. And she hated it for that. The next day, Briggs found her on the training ground again. She was demonstrating wind calls to the recruits, using scraps of paper tossed into the air, showing how even a whisper of movement could shift a shot at 1,000 meters. When the lesson ended, Briggs walked with her toward the armory. "You're not going to be able to keep this quiet much longer," he said. "I didn't ask for it to be loud." "I know, but those recruits you're training, they'll talk, they'll tell stories, and every time you pick up that rifle, those stories grow." She stopped walking, turning to him. "Then tell me, do I stop picking it up? Do I let men die because I want to keep my silence? Is that what you're asking me?" Briggs held her gaze. He didn't answer. Because they both knew the truth. She would never stop. Not while there were lives to be saved. Not while she could still steady her breath, lower her heart rate, and decide a battle with a single squeeze. 2 weeks later, the crisis came. A convoy ambushed in a canyon, trucks burning, soldiers trapped on the rocks. The enemy had dug in with RPGs and heavy guns, cutting off escape from both ends. The call went out across the base. Units scrambled, command barked orders, panic threaded through every channel. Briggs found her in the armory, rifle already in her hands. "You don't have to," he began. She cut him off with a single look, calm, steady, final. "This is who I am," she said quietly. And for the first time, Briggs didn't argue. He just nodded. The canyon was a furnace of dust and fire. Smoke curled from burning vehicles, flames licking the sky. The trapped soldiers huddled behind wreckage, pinned by gunfire raining from above. Raina climbed the ridge in silence, boots slipping on loose stone, lungs burning with effort. Her spotters trailed behind, eyes wide, fear etched into every line of their faces. At the top, she settled into place. The rifle came alive in her hands. The scope painted the battlefield in harsh clarity. A gunner on a ridgeline, crosshair steady, trigger break, one down. Another moving with an RPG. Exhale, squeeze, two. Her rhythm was mechanical, breath, aim, fire. But inside something cracked. Because with each shot, she remembered the general's words. Who gave you the authority to decide that? Her authority was the trigger. Her justification was the soldiers scrambling below, alive because of her choices. But the weight was growing heavier. The fight dragged on. Enemy fire thinned, breaking under her precision. The convoy survivors pushed through gaps, dragging the wounded. Her shots carved open every path they took. By the time the last man stumbled clear, smoke still curling from the wrecks, Raina lowered her rifle. Her cheek was raw where stone had scraped her skin, her hands stiff from hours of control. And in the quiet after, she felt it again, that mix of relief and sorrow, lives saved, lives ended, both carved into her as deep as the tally marks on her rifle. Back at the base, command was waiting, not with gratitude, with questions. "How many?" the general asked, voice flat. Raina didn't answer. Briggs spoke instead, tone sharp, "Enough to bring our men home." The general's stare lingered on her, cold, calculating. "This can't continue off the record. If you're going to operate, it has to be official, controlled." Raina's jaw tightened. She understood what that meant. They wanted to put her back into the machine, to make Valkyrie Zero a tool again, a weapon they could aim wherever they pleased. And she realized that terrified her more than death ever had. That night alone in the armory, she added another tally mark. The steel was crowded now, each line carving the story deeper. She pressed the blade hard, etching until the mark was clean. Then she set the rifle down and whispered to the empty room, "How many more until I disappear again?" The silence gave no answer. "How long can you run from a name before it catches you?" The summons came at dawn. No escort, no explanation, just an envelope delivered to the armory door. Raina slid it open with the edge of a cartridge and read the single page inside. Orders. Not a request, not a quiet favor whispered in a hallway. Official deployment orders. Call sign, Valkyrie 0. Her hands trembled. Only once, a quick shudder she silenced before it became visible. She folded the page and slipped it into her pocket. The machine had found her again. In the operations center, the general waited. Maps glowed red with markers. Drones streamed live feeds of another mountain range halfway across the world. Enemy positions, fortified strongholds, hostages rumored to be held inside. It was a scenario built for someone who could do what no one else could. "You'll deploy with a small team," the general said. "Insertion at night, high-altitude approach. Eliminate anti-air and overwatch. Clear the path for extraction." He spoke as though she were a piece of equipment. Raina stood still. "And if I refuse?" The general's eyes stayed on the map. "Then I'll put someone else there and they'll die. You know it, I know it. You're the only one who can make sure they don't." The words were bait and chain all at once. Briggs shifted, his hands behind his back. He looked at her, not like an officer, but like a man who understood exactly what this would cost. "Why now?" she asked softly. "Because the ghosts of what you did at Sentinel Peaks and the canyon aren't ghosts anymore," Briggs said. "They're proof, and Command is tired of pretending you don't exist." The general's voice was colder. "You're an asset, Sergeant Mercer. It's time to act like one." She didn't answer. She just turned and walked out, the paper in her pocket heavy as lead. She packed in silence. The rifle, magazines, minimal kit. Every movement felt like déjà vu, the same ritual she had performed before missions that officially never happened. But this time was different. This time she wasn't disappearing into shadow. This time, everyone would know she was Valkyrie 0. And that terrified her more than death. Briggs found her in the hangar before the flight. The team assigned to her waited a respectful distance away, hand-picked operators, none of them knowing quite how to stand near her. "You don't have to do this," Briggs said quietly. Raina snapped a magazine into a pouch. "You know that's not true. You're not a weapon. Don't let them make you one again." She looked at him finally, her expression calm but her eyes fierce. "I'm not doing it for them. I'm doing it for the people trapped out there. Don't forget that." He exhaled, nodding. "Just come back." She gave no promise. The insertion was brutal. Thin air, icy wind tearing at her face, the dark belly of the aircraft roaring as they prepared to jump. The operators moved with rehearsed precision, but their eyes kept flicking to her. She stared straight ahead, hands on her harness, breathing steady, the old calm settling in like an old wound. When the light turned green, she stepped into the dark. The mountain swallowed them whole. They landed high on a jagged plateau slick with frost. The air was so thin it cut like glass. The team spread out, moving low, scanning with night optics. Raina took point. She didn't need maps. She read the terrain as if it were a language only she spoke. Every rock, every crease of shadow told her where the enemy would be, where they would move, where they would die. She found her perch overlooking the compound below, a cluster of shacks in dug-in positions, floodlights sweeping the slopes. Anti-air launchers waited near the edges, their operators relaxed, confident in the high ground. She unfolded the bipod, settled behind the rifle. The world through the scope turned sharp and clear. Distance, wind, elevation, all calculated without thought. She exhaled. The first shot cut the night. A launcher operator dropped before his cigarette hit the ground. The second shot punched through a spotlight, plunging half the compound into darkness. The third silenced a gunner who had just turned his head. The operators below moved as she carved open their path, slipping through the compound like shadows. But she wasn't invincible. A flash from her peripheral vision, the enemy sniper. She shifted, too slow. The round struck the rock inches from her head, spraying her with shards. She rolled, heart hammering, scanning for the glint of glass. There, dug in higher on the ridge, a second overwatch she hadn't seen. He was good, very good. For a heartbeat, she froze. The wind howled across the slope, carrying the taste of metal and stone. She had been here before. Cunnar, Sentinel Peaks, always another sniper in the dark, always a shadow of herself. Then her training took over. She moved laterally, sliding behind a jut of rock, rifle tucked tight. She peeked, spotted the faint silhouette, crosshairs brushing the man's chest. Inhale, exhale, squeeze. The rifle cracked, and the silhouette folded. Her breath came back slowly. She shifted back to covering the team. Below, the operators breached the shacks, freeing hostages, dragging them out into the night. Raina's shots kept the high ground clear, cutting down anyone who tried to move on them. Each round was a decision, each impact a choice she owned. When the last man stumbled out, the compound was silent but for the wind. She lowered the rifle, eyes scanning for any sign of counterattack. Nothing moved. The exfil bird roared in low, skids hitting the frost. The team bundled the hostages aboard, shouting over the rotor wash. Raina stood on the ridge, the rifle across her chest, watching as the helicopter lifted into the dark. For a moment she was alone again, just a silhouette on a mountain, the legend nobody wanted to be. Back at the base hours later, she stepped off the aircraft into a crowd of eyes. Officers, medics, soldiers, all of them watching her. She felt it like a weight pressing down. Briggs met her at the edge of the tarmac. He didn't speak, neither did she. But the general stepped forward. "You just saved 30 lives, Sergeant Mercer," officially. Her expression didn't change. "Good. You understand what this means now," the general said. "No more hiding, no more pretending. You're Valkyrie Zero again. The country needs you." Raina looked past him at the mountains silhouetted in dawn. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise. "No, the country doesn't need me. The men out there do, that's all." She walked past him without waiting for dismissal. Briggs watched her go. He saw the stiffness in her shoulders, the way her hands clenched at her sides. He knew what this meant. The ghost had been dragged back into the light. And light was far crueler than shadow. That night in the armory she added another tally mark. The steel was almost full now. Each line was a scar, not a boast. She stared at it for a long time. Then very softly she said to herself, "How much of me is left in here?" The armory gave no answer. What happens when a ghost can no longer hide? Raina had always believed she could vanish, that if she kept her head down, kept her words few, kept her rifle buried in the quiet corners of the armory, the world would forget her. And maybe, for a while, it had. But legends have a way of surfacing, even when the person inside them wants nothing more than silence. Now everywhere she walked, eyes followed. Young soldiers whispered in chow lines. Commanders debated in offices. Even civilians on base carried fragments of rumor. They didn't know the details, but they knew enough. A woman on the ridges, a rifle that never missed. A call sign whispered like a prayer and a curse. Valkyrie Zero. And Raina Mercer, the woman behind it, felt herself disappearing beneath the weight of her own myth. She still trained recruits. Every morning before the sun cleared the peaks, she stood on the range with them, teaching them to breathe, to listen, to steady their hands. She never raised her voice. She never boasted. but the young men and women watched her like disciples. One morning, a girl barely 20 asked her, "Sergeant, how do you know when to take the shot?" Raina paused. The rifle in her hands felt heavier than it had in years. She could have given a technical answer about angles, wind calls, distances. Instead, she spoke softly. "You take it when you know the person you save matters more than the person you end." The recruits stared at her, some nodding, some unsettled. She didn't explain further. She just set the rifle down and walked away. That night, Briggs found her sitting outside the barracks, watching the mountains. The stars hung low, the peaks etched black against the sky. "You're quieter than usual," he said. She gave the faintest hint of a smile. "That's saying something." He sat beside her, resting his elbows on his knees. "They're talking about making you permanent, standing orders, deployments, official recognition." Her jaw tightened. "Which means turning me back into a weapon." "Maybe, or maybe it means giving you the authority to choose when and how. Maybe it means you don't have to hide anymore." She turned to him, eyes sharp. "Do you know what happens when they turn someone into a legend? They stop seeing the person. They see the symbol, and symbols don't get to break, they don't get to feel, they don't get to be human." Briggs was quiet for a long time. Then he said almost gently, "So what do you want, Raina?" She looked back at the mountains. Her voice was low but steady. "I want them to live. That's all I've ever wanted." The next crisis came without warning. A forward outpost under siege, cut off in a valley with no reinforcements near enough. The comms crackled with panic, with men shouting coordinates, with gunfire pounding through every channel. Raina didn't wait for orders. She was already moving before Briggs found her. Rifle in hand, kit slung over her shoulder, boots striking the dirt with deliberate rhythm. He caught up to her just before the transport. "This might be it," he said. She gave him the faintest nod, not of agreement, of understanding. And then she was gone. The valley was chaos, smoke rising from burning vehicles, mortars punching fire into the sky, soldiers crouched behind fractured walls, pinned and desperate. Raina climbed above it all, the rifle steady against her chest. Every muscle in her body screamed from the ascent, but her face never changed. She reached the crest, dropped prone, and unfolded the bipod. Through the scope, the battle sharpened. Enemy machine gunners tearing the valley apart. Mortar crews reloading in frantic rhythm. Snipers hidden in cracks of stone, their muzzles flashing death into the dust. She chose. And one by one she silenced them. Each shot was precise. Each trigger pull was a verdict. But with every life she ended, she felt her own heart grow heavier. Not because she doubted, but because she remembered. Every tally was another weight she could never put down. Below, the pinned soldiers pushed forward. They didn't know her name. They didn't know her call sign. They only knew that someone unseen was carving open their path. They lived because she carried the burden. The fight stretched long into the night. By the time the last soldier was pulled out, her body was bruised, her cheek raw, her eyes burning from hours behind the glass. She descended in silence, boots slipping on loose stone, rifle heavy on her back. At the base, Briggs was waiting. He looked at her, at the dirt and blood on her uniform, at the exhaustion etched into her face. "You did it again," he said quietly. She gave a faint shrug. "They're alive." He stared at her, searching for something in her eyes. "And you?" For a long time she said nothing. Then softly, "Pieces of me are gone, but that's the trade." Days later, command gathered the entire base. Recognition. Formal words spoken over loudspeakers, commendations handed out like polished medals. They called her name, not the call sign, her real name, Staff Sergeant Raina Mercer. She stepped forward, rifle slung across her back, shoulders straight. Applause rolled over her like a wave she couldn't stop. But she didn't smile. She didn't bask in it. She only nodded once, accepting the moment for what it was, acknowledgement of what had been done. not celebration. When it ended, she slipped away before anyone could follow. Back in the armory, alone again, she added a new tally mark. The steel was scarred now, the lines etched deep and closed together. She pressed the blade hard, carving slowly, deliberately. Then she set the rifle down, leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. For once, the silence didn't feel like an enemy. Briggs found her there hours later. He stood in the doorway, watching her in the dim light. "You could walk away again," he said quietly. Her eyes opened. She looked at the rifle, at the marks carved into it, at the story it told. "No," she said softly, "I can't, not anymore." He nodded. He didn't argue. Because he understood now. Some legends aren't chosen, they're carried. And some burdens aren't put down, they're endured. The next morning the sun rose over the Colorado peaks, painting the mountains in gold. Raina stood on the range, recruits gathering around her, their faces young, hopeful, unscarred. She looked at them in silence. Then she said the only words that mattered. "Every shot carries weight, remember that." The recruits nodded, not fully understanding, but one day they would. And when she walked away, her rifle slung across her back, the tally marks catching the light, she knew the truth she had tried so long to deny. She was Valkyrie Zero. She was Raina Mercer. She was both. Not a ghost, not a myth. A soldier. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.